Okay, I think we are ready to start. So I'm just going to stop the share so you can see all of us. So welcome everybody to Avallone and Trade Compliance's webinar. Today we have Sune, who if you've been to our webinars before, you may have met. We'll do some introductions in a little bit, but we're happy to have Lars Brodersen from Trade Compliance with us today as one of our speakers, our panelists. So a couple of housekeeping things. The session is being recorded, so anyone who registered but wasn't able to join today will be able to watch this later on. And I do thank everyone who did take the time to join today. So if you have any questions, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with joining webinars and whatnot, but there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, in the Q&A chat. And then we should have some time at the end where we'll review and answer any questions. And of course, if we actually can't answer them today, we'll do our best to email you or contact you to address your specific questions. So yeah, so we will make sure that we get to any of your questions, of course. So with that, I will give a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to take probably about 40 minutes discussion that Lars and Sune and I will have. And then after, again, we'll have some questions from the audience that we'll address. And then for anyone who's actually watching this recording after today, then we'll also have an email address that we provide that you can send us any questions that you have. So I will do a quick introduction of myself, and then obviously the three of us. So for myself, I am Ada Chan, the VP of Strategy and Planning at Avallone. And amongst many other things, I work on the concept and development of our evangelism and outreach efforts. I've worked on in many industries, but in the past decade, I've really focused on working in the ethics and compliance space. And I'm something I've really enjoyed learning and being a part of. So today I'll work as a guide or a host, if you will, through our webinar. So maybe what I can do is if I hand it over to Lars, would you give our audience an introduction of your background and what you're doing at Trade Compliance?
Yes, thank you, Ada, Sune, and the rest of the Avallone team for hosting this event. I'm excited to discuss these topics with you. Well, as the founder of the law firm tradecompliance.dk, I advise Danish and international clients in export control and sanctions related matters. And before establishing the law firm in 2016, I worked more than 5 years as the global head of export control and sanctions in a Danish headquartered multinational company with production and sale globally. And I can assure you that I benefit every day from this hands-on experience when I discuss feasible mitigating initiatives and solutions with my clients. And then also since 2013, I have provided training in export control and sanctions issues to Danish companies. That was the short one.
Great. Thank you, Lars. A lot of deep experience, especially for what we're talking about today. And for those of you who have joined previously, like I said, probably know Sune, but for those who have not, maybe Sune, you could introduce yourself and your background and what you do at Avallone.
Yes, please. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Sune. I'm responsible for our customer success and financial crime prevention team in Avallone. I have been at Avallone for 3.5 years. And before that, I had a longer career in Danske Bank, 23 years, where the last 10 I worked with operational risk, compliance, and financial crime risks. So that's kind of my background for being here. And I've really been looking forward to this webinar. Lars always have some really interesting things to say about sanctions. So looking forward to discuss.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to get started. And what I want to just preface right now is I think everyone on this, I think sometimes with some webinars, we will take a higher level approach to KYC or sanctions, but we are really going to get nerdy and deep. We normally don't share a lot of slides because I think we like to focus on having the conversation, but just to kind of, again, set us all on the same page very quickly, I'd love, Lars, for you to talk about some definitions of the things that we're going to really focus on today, taking like 2 minutes maybe. So what I'll do is I think you've prepared some slides that I'll share, but while I'm sharing it, could you maybe just talk a little bit to the group about how you define product restrictions and in particular export control and military items?
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, I would say due to governmental restrictions, when you cannot freely sell an item to anyone who's interested in purchasing such item, there will be restrictions. And the restrictions can be either in form of a prohibition on a sale, or it can be subject to license requirements when you, as a seller, before exporting the item in beforehand, must obtain a license from the competent authorities. And then what is the difference between dual use sanctions and sanctions with product controls? Well, we have dual use items, and we have military items. Dual use items are strategic items which, due to their capabilities, can have an impact on international peace, security, and stability. And these principles for dual use items, they apply worldwide. And the members of the underlying export control regimes, they have mutually committed themselves to put restrictions on these items and implement licensing policies to ensure that the items are used for civil and peaceful purposes at the end users, who are all screened by the authorities. Why? And then we also have that's the dual use items. And the screen or the slide you had before was military items, and military items, they're quite simply designed for military use, while the dual use items in the opposite are designed for civil use, but they, as is written here, they can also be used either in a military application or for development or production of weapons of mass destruction, WMD, or violation of human rights. And again, the purpose of these dual use rules or export control rules is to restrict the access to such items. Then we have sanctions.
Yes.
And yes, and sanctions is used as a foreign policy tool. Some say it's modern warfare without firing missiles. And sanctions in the pure form refer to asset freeze and prohibition on doing business with entities designated by the authorities. Originally, it was the EU, the UN, United Nations, who took the decisions. But now you see more and more which are decided on a little lower level, for instance, decisions made by the EU. And sanctions, they refer to specific entities, specific countries, or even specific sectors within a specific country. And now, to blur everything up, we also see sanctions with product controls. And sanctions with product controls, they target certain sectors within a specific country, not because the products will have a direct destabilizing effect, ending up in the wrong hands, like dual use items, like the strategic items, but mainly because the target must somehow feel some economic pressure and pain. We saw them, I think, originally in the Iran sanctions, and now we see them in full scale in the current Russia sanctions.
Great, thanks, Lars.
And I would say that what we see in Russia was that after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the EU imposed actually already at that time sanctions on certain key equipment used for oil production in Russia. But here in 2022, the range of items sanctioned for Russia has exploded. And now, for instance, office furniture made of wood is prohibited to export directly or indirectly to Russia or for use in Russia, since the EU wants to target the industrial capability, among many other things, in Russia.
I think I'll pause quickly just to show, so then I'll have to share again. But here, I think for the remainder of our conversation as well, we'll also reference the OFAC advisory as well. And I'm just showing a quick screenshot of some of the pages, but if anyone also wants a link to that, we'll include that when we send out an email with the recording later on afterwards. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing. Thank you, Lars, for the kind of the context and definition. So you were just starting to talk a little bit about Russia. So I think maybe if we can kind of like focus on that a little bit more with, with what's happening in the world today, then how has the Russian invasion of Ukraine impacted some of the areas that you've just talked about?
Well, the range and speed of implementation of the Russian sanctions is unprecedented. And as you may all be aware, that the EU has just agreed on the 14th sanctions package targeting Russia. So the speed and the scope is we have never seen this before, and the Iran sanctions, they are nothing compared to what we actually see today on Russia. So, well, this invasion in February 22 was, it has exploded everything, also in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe also with Russia, I think it's not just about the sanctions, right? It's also kind of public opinion. Are you allowed to do business in Russia, and what kind of business can you do in Russia? So I think there's kind of a lot of attention on Russia, and it makes it extremely difficult to be doing business in Russia, or maybe just do business with stuff that could go to Russia, right? And it's an interesting comparison you do, Lars, with Iran, because Iran is more or less many banks, many countries just said kind of, we just don't do any business with Iran because it's too difficult. But Russia is a big country, so it seems like it's a bit more difficult to take that kind of no business at all decision.
I think you're right, Sune. I think the Russian market was so much bigger and so much closer, and I think the reason why you actually did not do at the end any business with Iran, even today, despite the fact that you actually are encouraged by the EU to do it, is because of the banks. And I think the OFAC reaction, or the OFAC sanctions, which we will discuss later on, will also have an impact on, I think, on the risk appetite of the foreign financial institutions. So I think you will, and that's also what I experienced from my clients, that it's almost impossible to find a bank who will facilitate any transactions to Russia, even though you are allowed to do it. And I think one more thing is interesting to say, that I always ask clients, first of all, we investigate, can you actually do business with Russia? And if you find out that you can, these products are out of scope, but then the next question, will you do it? Also because of the public opinion. So you should really consider, and there it's not only the compliance team, but there maybe it also group communication and a lot of other stakeholders in the company that should be involved in that decision.
Yeah, and as you also mentioned, Lars, that the changes in the sanctions it happened so fast. So even if you thought you were on the right side a week ago, maybe you're not in a month. So you also need to take that into your risk decision when you start doing business in Russia or Belarus.
Yeah, you have to. I would say you have to maintain your compliance setup on a very regular basis, because often when there is an update of the sanctions package, there will be the scope of products will be wider, maybe a bit, because I think you have almost reached the limit, but more entities are added, and I think what is also very what has been the focus from the start from the authorities is that the indirect business with Russia is a focus, and the diversion, the risk of diversion of products, because I would say almost any company say we do not do business with Russia. Okay, that's fine, but the products you sell, as I referred to the office furniture, are probably listed, but how do you then secure that they are not ending up in Russia, for instance, via a third country. And so you have to really have focus on, if you get an order from especially if it's a new business partner from Turkey or from the Emirates, or maybe even worse, from China, you really have to consider, are these ending up in China, or is this on its way to Russia? And what do you do to, how is your due diligence? What do you do to check this? And not at least, how do you document it?
Mhm. No, absolutely. I think maybe what we can do is maybe let's talk a little about the OFAC, the new regulations that they're enforcing, especially with the products in Russia. So maybe Lars, could you expand a little bit on what I showed a glimpse of earlier, but what's your assessment of what's in there?
Yeah, it's well, it's recently updated, and the version you just showed was from the 12th of June.
Mhm.
And what has actually happened was that like the EU OFAC has imposed many sanctions on Russia since the invasion on 24th of February in 22. And what is interesting here is that normally to get impacted by the US sanctions, most of them requires that there is a US nexus, either due to the origin of goods, the nationality of involved person or entities, or by the use of US dollars as currency. But the US, they have also a term which is secondary sanctions, and secondary sanctions are actually targeting non-US companies. And in December last year, the US president issued an executive order 14.1.14, and this executive order was amending executive order 14.024. And this new executive order 14.1.14 introduced secondary sanctions targeting foreign financial institutions assisting certain significant transactions made by their customers ending up in the Russian war machine, despite the fact that there is no US nexus, meaning no US goods, no US persons, or no US currency. So, and from the US and its allies, there is a focus to restrict the flow of support to the Russian military industrial base.
It's really that's a big move they are coming with OFAC there, right? So I think that could definitely be a game changer also for how financial institutions in Europe have to react on this. We see that more and more companies and KYC is kind of, so KYC is not just about people now, it's also about policies and procedures and know your customers and all that. So I think this will definitely just scale the KYC requirements towards companies, because they should not only tell about who they are selling to, but also who they are expecting to selling to, and how they work with these kind of restrictions and making sure that the money doesn't, or goods are not going to Russia, right? It's really interesting how they also kind of regulate outside of the US, even on, as you said, no US nexus.
Yeah, but that's the famous extraterritoriality of the US rules, and they are famous for that, I think. And I think the first time we saw these secondary sanctions was on the Iran sanctions, where I would say they lost patience on the speed of for instance, the EU sanctions, and then they said, okay, we'll show the way. And I think it was more or less the same, that you had to choose, either you do business with us or with them. And I think because putting a pressure on these foreign financial institutions, where they what they actually risk losing their US correspondent banks, as because the US financial institutions, they may be prohibited to engage with foreign financial institutions that do not comply. And also the foreign financial institutions that do not comply, they also risk that all their property in the US is blocked due to a designation. And I think that we could end up in a situation where the pressure is coming both from the authorities, but all companies, they need a bank. And I think that the banks, they may feel the heat coming on now. And I would expect that they would put much more pressure on their customers because to mitigate their risk.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree, because I think banks have spent a lot of money, a lot of resources the last years to get up to speed on AML and sanctions regulation. So I think definitely there is a trend for them to start pushing it out to their customer, also taking part of the risk mitigation, not only just replying to KYC information, but they also kind of enforce them to take active stance on this, right, with policies and how they are handling the risks.
Yes, because I would expect, I would say that this is a game changer, and I would expect financial institutions really to react. And I foresee that they must enhance their KYC processes, and as you just touched upon, they have to pay much more interest to the product portfolio of their customers. Not only who are they doing business with, but also what are they selling, what are they exporting, because we are now outside the scope of strategic export control goods, but we also include more ordinary goods, and that could be a bare printed circuit board, which is subject to, which is one of these 29 products that are listed within 8 product groups within this executive order. So I would say that this product range have historically not been of major interest in a sanctions perspective, but this has dramatically changed.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting with especially the angle with how financial institutions are going to react. That was really insightful from the two of you. So with kind of turning a little bit to the non-US countries, do either of you think there'll be any political initiatives regarding this, this OFAC release that they've had? Do you think there's going to be, what's going to happen in that geopolitical context?
Yeah, I think it's only 2 weeks ago since there was a G7 meeting, and there was a full agreement on targeting the Russian military industrial base. So I think there's a consensus on this, but I think we should just go a little step back, because I think it's important to touch upon what can we expect that the financial institutions can do and will do. Because I would, as a consequence of this, I would recommend that the financial institutions prepare themselves to make this enhanced KYC, which would enable them to apply a risk-based approach by being able to identify the relevant customers to approach in a prioritized order. And I would assume, but that's just my assumption, that some of the financial institutions would need some training on the product side, being able to lift this task. And as a financial institution, I would prepare a risk analysis, but to do so, I would need some input. And I would, as a financial institution, get familiar with the product list issued by OFAC. And as I said before, it includes 29 items within 8 groups. And to do this, you may need some assistance or training to lift this task. Secondly, I would start identifying the customers that may be involved in production or trade of such items. And then thirdly, I would, in a prioritized way, reach out to these customers to learn more about their their compliance setup. For instance, to learn what procedures they have in place to ensure that the goods are not ending up in the wrong place. What are their KYC processes? And do they apply a risk-based approach considering the items, their applicability, the geographical market, and their customers? Because as I said before, the risk picture doing business within the EU and its close allies, it's much different from outside in, for instance, countries like China, known for diverting critical goods to Russia in support of their military industrial base. And these thinkings are also some of what you see in the EU sanctions on the no Russia clause, because if you saw items which are on the high priority list, which agreed upon on the allies, if you have items on this list and you sell them outside the EU and 9 further countries, the normal allies, close allies, you have to add a no Russia clause, meaning that you can say the EU is somehow outsourcing the enforcement of the sanctions to the companies by having this no Russia clause. So you really have to consider. You have to be much more familiar with the items that your customers are actually manufacturing or trading.
And I think there's some really good points, Lars. And I also think that seeing what kind of questions that normally comes from banks today, it's a massive change, because one thing is to ask people about which country they are located or trading in. But now they need to start thinking, okay, but it's maybe they do not trade with Russia, but they trade with one country, and then that kind of counterparty will trade with Russia, and that's also a problem for you, right? So that kind of extra layer you need to understand in just the country aspect is one thing, and then you have the whole product dimension, which is also like, yeah, I think you called it enhanced due diligence. It's a part of that, but you could also argue to know if it's a higher risk, you need to ask about the product upfront for all customers. So knowing what product they are trading. And today, I think most KYC, it's kind of what's your business model, what is your main product, stuff like that. But that doesn't really get you down to all the categories where there might or might not be sanctions, right? So I think that's dramatically actually changed the KYC approach that you see today. There's much more focusing on the overall countries, the people. And by the way, people is also a big thing, right? Because when we talk about UBOs, does the source of funds, source of wealth, does that come from Russia money or not? That's also a thing, right? But I really think this with product, and that it's not only direct, but also the indirect, that really challenge everybody in this. And that will definitely also mean that at some points the workload will be put to the bank's customers also, because it's not possible for the banks to handle this alone. They need help from the companies to really get the overview of this.
Yeah, but they need some knowledge, because they need to be able to ask the right questions. And I think they need to apply a risk-based approach, because if they go to if they reach out, they can't reach out to all of the customers at the same time. I think they should do it in a prioritized way. So I would say that the key account for all the companies, I would train all the people with direct customer contact. I would train them and to help them or learn them what to look for, and then I would send them home and say, before tomorrow morning, please provide me with a list of any potential companies which have products within this portfolio, because then I would know where to start. Which companies should I reach out to?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sune.
No, but I basically agree. That's kind of, you need to start eating the elephant, right? But
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of customers. So in the banks, there's a lot of customers you don't know that well. It's not always you have a relationship manager on each customer. Of course, the large one, maybe they have someone have a huge insights into the individual company, but for some company you don't, right?
Yeah.
So it is for me it's an elephant. it's a turn for KYC and also to figure out how to handle this in an efficient way.
Yeah, I agree.
I was actually interested in what you were saying, the training of it. Is that something that is a difficult type of training to have someone be able to identify or assess, or like, be able to see that there might be some potential risk with a customer?
No, I don't find it that difficult, because you always, before you do training, you always have to consider what kind of training should this group, this function have to be able to fulfill their task. Because if you make an overload, which is very easy within this area, you risk to lose them. So no, I actually you can train them, and I always start giving an introduction. Why are we focusing on this? So I start on a much higher level, and then it's just like if you have a look at Google Earth, you start out and you see the whole the globe, and then you zoom in, and then suddenly they see the relevance of them going out and ask these questions. Because if you start by just saying these are the rules, please go out and ask, they will not know the background, and they will get a lot of questions from their customers. Why are you doing this, and so forth. So no, it's actually possible, but maybe it's a change in the mindset of the banks, because I think they have, as I understand, most been focusing on who are you actually doing business with. Are there any on the asset freeze list or whatever? But here you really have to consider what they're actually selling.
Very cool. You kind of mentioned a little bit about, this would affect obviously the customers or the companies that the banks are working with. So maybe the two of you can talk a little bit more about, how this kind of increased focus from the bank side will affect the companies, and also, with the initiative.
Yeah, shall I start? Well, I would expect that that the banks will put a further compliance pressure on the companies, but this pressure, they will also experience that from their business partners, and it could be from suppliers, because as a supplier, you need to pay much more attention to where your products are ending up, and you're not doing indirect business with Russia. So so I would expect that the companies can expect that they will get a lot more questions, and I don't think it's an acceptable answer saying we're not doing business with Russia. No, but could your products potentially end up in Russia? Do you know where they're ending up? And normally you could say that it's more common products. So you should not have it has not until now been a requirement that you actually know where they're ending up, because they were not critical. They could not do any harm. They were not strategic. It was not a dual use item. But as I said, now more common items are of interest here. So it will be a complete new discipline to many companies, I expect. Sune, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, but I think it will be, and I think it just also highlight the needs for company to do KYC, right? So it's like if their banks ask them, who are you trading with? How do you make sure you don't get Russian funds or your goods are going into Russian deals after they left you? It's like that kind of counterparty due diligence on who you're doing business with start to be more important. I think when I started working with KYC in the bank, there was a lot of talking about maybe a bit more like a very bad scenario in the future. There was kind of this know your customer's customer, which more or less I think we are going into now, right? That is kind of going to happen now. And then that's also why we see many non-regulated companies starting to do KYC on their counterparty, but also do screening, not only for sanctions and PEPs, but also for adverse media, just to make sure that the one they're doing business with is not kind of being well known to do business with doubtful people, right? So I think we see much more also for the non-regulated companies that they have to be in control of KYC, which normally have been something you only thought for regulated companies.
I agree. This certainly applies as well for non-regulated companies, and I think actually the adverse media is can often be a helpful because it can be seen as a red flag. Of course, you need to consider what is the source and what is the reason for this adverse media. Is it some working environment or whatever? But it could be that there's been some stories about a potential link and access to a Russian oligarch or whoever. So I think actually the adverse media can be very helpful, and as you said, I think that the companies, they should prepare themselves for this from coming from the banks, and what could they actually do? And it's very easy to say, yeah, you can simply have your documentation in place, but what is it? If you go a little further down, what is it to have your documentation in place? Well, I think you should start by have a check that you can document that your products are actually classified correctly. And that's both in respect of dual use, have you considered the control list Annex 1 to the Council Regulation 821 from 2021 and the commerce control list? Are you sure that you apply the correct ECCN number, export control classification number, if any? But now it's also important that you have the correct tariff classification. And why so? Because the annexes to the Russia sanctions, they refer to CN codes, and they are normally only customs related, and normally they have importance if you are an importer, because they are deciding what customs should you pay, if any. But now they are of huge importance for you as an exporter, because as I said, the sanctions and the annexes to the sanctions, they refer to the CN codes. So you really must make a check that you have classified them correctly. And I think that's the first thing. That's the first place I would start.
I think that's a really valid point, Lars, that you need to be in control of that. I also think this with the KYC. Now we of course a KYC company, right? But I think start thinking about who's your counterparty and starting collecting information about them. I think everybody needs to do sanction screening these days because you need that to not break any of these sanctions. But then before you can do that, you need to know who you're doing business with, and you also need to know information enough that you can investigate if you get a potential hit in the screening, the same for the adverse media. I think also you should prepare your as a company for replying to banks. So it's like, how do you document the processes that you have? How do you document that? One thing is that you're saying that you know your customers and you have asked them for certain information. But how do you document the process, and how do you kind of make a reply that actually based on knowledge and not just assumptions? I think that's also something to do. I don't think it needs to be something big, but you should start thinking about how does your financial crime prevention framework look like. It sounds very bankish, but I think all international companies should start thinking about it. If you're selling goods outside Denmark, for example, you should start thinking about this.
Yeah, because I couldn't agree more, because it's good that you do all the right things, but if you can't document it, if you can't prove it, I would say you're only half the way. Maybe you have maybe you are not ending up in serious breaches, but you need to be able to document one, and that's towards your banks, but also especially if the authorities come, because if something happens, and such things can happen, you can have a violation everywhere, but then they will ask, what has happened, why has it happened, and what have you done to prevent this from happening? And then the last question, what have you done to prevent this from happening? Why will it not happen again? So and you can keep a long speech, but you need to have documentation in place. You need to have work procedures, workflows. For instance, if you say, do you have screening? Who does the screening? What do you, if you have a hit? How do you review it? Is it a false positive? Is there do you escalate it? Who can take the decisions? Have you put these things in writing? Then you are in a much better place should a violation occur, because then you can document that you have actually done something. And one thing is to have the procedures, another thing is to follow up on them. And I strongly recommend that you have an audit now and then, because there you actually there you can again document that the things are actually working and they are implemented. Otherwise, you will not know whether they are effective or efficient or need some update or whatever.
Would agree, but I think it's also, you mentioned training earlier in the meeting, right? So I think the whole training part is extremely important, because I don't think there's a lot of people in the companies who kind of love these tasks and also maybe don't have the competences for it. So I think training, getting support for people who knows about this is extremely important, building up the internal knowledge over time, right?
Yeah, you have to identify the touch points in the company, and when you're dealing with export control and sanctions, it's almost any function except on the production floor, but almost every function which are somehow involved in the processes, and there you need to identify some key persons which you can train. And it's not one size fits all training, because it's different tasks that they're fulfilling during the day. So you need to understand the business and then inform them what do we define roles and responsibilities. What do we expect of you, and then train them to learn what should they look out for.
I think these are really good points. I want to kind of bring this a little bit back to what Sune talked about earlier, is that the two of you have listed some like very detailed sort of requirements, not the right word, but like steps that companies can take to start documenting and ensuring that they're sort of looking to avoid or prevent any problems. But with the trend then you mentioned, Sune, with non-regulated companies, do you think if non-regulated companies are also starting to, you know, again, focus on some of this KYC, some of the same steps, do they need to do it in the same level? Is it like, what's the kind of, what should they focus on, I guess, in when somebody who's non-regulated is doing that?
But it's a good question. I think since they're not regulated, they can, to an even higher degree than regulated company, apply risk-based approach, which means that they can go for the big chunks first. You know, where do you do most risk mitigation with less effort? I think when you start working with this, and I think it would be fairly fast to get up and running on that. But then when you start working with it, you gain more knowledge, and then maybe you start building on that, right? Because you suddenly can see stuff you couldn't see before. But I think you can come very long with kind of an efficient screening tool, some good KYC, you know, get some good advice on someone who knows something about trade compliance, right? So I think there's some big chunks you can start with, and then you can start involving when you get more knowledge. I think, and that's kind of a mantra for me, like this with doing nothing, definitely do not kind of mitigate any risk. So it's better to do 7% than 0% instead of aiming for 100%, right? So it's like, it's about getting started, starting to understand the discipline, start to understand, you know, what kind of risk you have, and then you can involve from that.
Yeah, and a lot of people, a lot of clients ask, we don't have a compliance program, and then they maybe find one on the internet, and said, get started. You start with one page, and then you learn more, and you it develops, and then you have 2 pages. But it's a process, and the authorities also acknowledge that it's a process. We all need to start somewhere. So, but it's so crucial that the current document you have, that it actually reflects what you're doing. It's what your business, not what you would like to do, because the document you have and the procedures you have are the ones that you will be measured up against. So it's better to have a less ambitious program, and you actually comply with it, and you actually follow it, and then you can. It's a journey. Then you can develop, and it's very accepted to have a risk-based approach. But to have a risk-based approach requires that you actually have drawn up the risk picture, that you know the risk picture, because it doesn't make any sense to say that you have a risk-based approach if you don't know the risk, because then you can prioritize them and say, where do you get most value out of your money? And that is what you need to do, of course. And I think the authorities accept that the resources are not unlimited. So of course you need to put your efforts in where you can get most out of it.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. I think now that we're rounding out to the last 10 minutes of our webinar, I think we have time. Hopefully, it's kind of a big topic, so I hope we have enough time before we wrap up for the 2 of you to answer this. But the question is, given the evolving and expanding nature of sanctions, especially those targeting Russia that you've mentioned, what are some of the biggest challenges that foreign financial institutions will have with staying compliant? So that is, what are the specific difficulties that these foreign financial institutions will have because of these recent OFAC requirements?
Well, I would say that that they should draw up their risk picture and make this risk analysis, and then they should reach out to the customers that could impose most risk on them, to check out that they are not that they know what they're doing, and they know actually what they are exporting, what the application are for these products, which markets are they on, and not at least who are they doing business with. It's what we have seen is that also the US and the EU and the G7 has agreed on this, to have focus on Chinese companies, and especially new Chinese companies that have popped up after the invasion, because there are some companies that have established in China after February 22 with the aim and purpose of providing materials for the Russian military industrial base. So yeah, you need to get closer to your customers, I think.
Yeah, Sune, any thoughts from your side for that?
No, but I fully agree. And as said in the meeting, I think it's an add-on to what you're doing in most KYC today, or maybe it's not an add-on, but it's definitely a deep dive into something that has not been handled that deep so far.
Great, thanks, guys. So before we wrap up, two other things. Lars, anything else new? I know that the OFAC requirements we looked at were pretty new, but anything else new happening in the sanctions area that you think the audience and all of us should pay attention to?
Wow, I think we have just I don't know if you have all read the new the 14 sanctions package, but I think there will be a continued high focus on effective implementation and enforcement of the existing sanctions from the authorities, and that will be rather than enlarging the scope on sanctioned products. And I foresee that the common sanctions packages, as the most recent, will focus on circumvention and by closing holes in the current system, which has revealed. And that's why you also see that now entities in third countries, not only Russia, are actually designated because they have seen having a link or a nexus to Russia. So I think that is what I expect to see, because I don't expect to see much more products being added to the sanctions list, but rather more focus on ensuring that the ones already on the list are not ending up in Russia. And therefore you will see a further pressure from the authorities on the enforcement side.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll have another webinar in the future. It's great to get the knowledge from you, so hopefully we don't, but I think maybe then what we'll do is as a final question for each of you, what's a tip that you can recommend to the audience based on what we've discussed today? Maybe Sune, you want to start with your tip?
Yeah, but my tip is kind of do something right. So it's better to get started and not do anything perfect, but just get started where it makes most sense. Don't make it to a big project that have to run for a long time. You can get started and then you will gain knowledge over time.
Great, thanks. And what about you, Lars?
Yeah, and when you get started, make sure that it's anchored at the top management. The tone from the top is essential in these products. It's a top-down exercise, not a bottom-up, because you will be surprised how many functions you'll actually involve in these topics. Also to get the clear picture of the classification of the product side, there you will need to involve people from the development department and the engineering, and if their manager has not chipped in here, they will be in a conflict. Who should I finalize my project, which is according to my manager, or should I do this compliance task? Therefore, I often ask companies, is this anchored the right place? Because and it has to be the CEO saying this is important to us because it can have a material negative impact on us if we do not comply. So I want all of you to comply and to contribute to getting us to provide the correct documentation, making sure that we will be in a safe place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, I think we're rounding out the hour. So thank you, Lars, for joining us today and all your advice and your experience. Your knowledge really kind of comes through, even though we've only had an hour together here. And also thank you, Sune, for your time and also your knowledge. So for anyone who's watching this after today's session, if you have any follow-up questions, we're always here to help, both trade compliance and Avallone. So you can send us an email at hello@avallone.io, and then one of, whether it's Sune or we'll forward it to Lars, we can get back to you with any questions you might have on this. Thank you everyone for your time today. And thank you, Lars and Sune, again. Bye.
Thank you, Ada.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.